We don't perform well in school or work when we're denied social transition, basically. At the very minimum, social transition, if not medical transition. A whole new segment. There are duplicitous, underhanded ways of targeting us specifically. We're losing our democracy. We were consistently talking about how we have these bills popping up across the country that are attempting to limit the rights of trans people to access medical care. It's been like an ongoing conversation for a while. I've spoken at length about why that is harmful specifically. We have another one coming up, and this is getting to be a little bit egregious, frankly. This is getting to be a little bit overreach as far as government, like overreach into your private, right? Because Oklahoma seeks to ban gender affirming care under the age of 26. So you could be a legal adult for like 7 years before you can take hormones. Or like when they say gender affirming care, also like we would have to look at the details to find out what that means. Does that mean therapy? Could gender affirming care be therapy? If your therapist says, yeah, we should try dressing differently and trying a new name, like, is that going to be considered gender affirming care? And then that therapist gets arrested, you know? So let's look into this a little bit. The Oklahoma Senate bill filed late Wednesday would prevent a person under the age of 26 from accessing gender affirming health care. This is the latest sign that conservatives are seeking to block the procedure for not only children, but people well into adulthood. The bill, filed ahead of the legislature's February start, would bar healthcare providers in Oklahoma from administering or recommending gender-affirming medical care, including puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries for patients younger than 26 years old, punishable by an unclassified felony conviction and the possible revocation of their medical license for, quote, unprofessional conduct. So this is a little bit, I think, stronger than a lot of the other laws that we've seen, because usually we see this as, first of all, like not only is it stronger in terms of the ages that it's applying to, but it's also stronger in the sense that this is a criminal offense. I think that, you know, such as in places like Florida, when they've been changing their rulings, like I think that the main issue here is that they would lose funding, or that they would perhaps have their medical license revoked. But like the felony conviction certainly raises this to a greater status, I think. Right, puberty blockers. And there, of course, I'm sure that they're going to carve out exceptions. Like you are allowed to do puberty blockers for precocious puberty, and you're allowed to do surgeries on non-consenting babies in order to, quote, normalize them. I'm sure that that's going to be the case. So the measure would also prohibit public funds from being used to either directly or indirectly provide gender-affirming healthcare to an individual younger than 26, and would bar the state Medicaid program from covering procedures related to a person's gender transition. So snuck in there, let's not pretend like this is not so probably a lot of trans people across this country are on Medicaid, because Medicaid is the state insurance for poor people. So a lot of trans people are underemployed, underhoused, and they use the state Medicaid program, unless you live in a place like where I live, where it's not been expanded and you can't get Medicaid unless you can go through the whole disability process. Anyway, but so anyone for your entire life, for the entirety of your life, if you're on Medicaid, you can't get transition care through your insurance. Like you would have to have private insurance or pay for it outright. Moving forward, legislation being introduced by Oklahoma GOP State Senator David Bullard, who last year authored a new state law that prohibits trans youth from using school restrooms or locker rooms consistent with their gender identity. The ACLU has filed a lawsuit on behalf of 3 trans students against that law. So I'm guessing that law passed, which means that this one's probably going to pass. The bill filed Wednesday is titled the Millstone Act of 2023, which is a reference to a Bible passage that a person would be better off tying a large boulder around their neck to be, quote, drowned in the depths of the sea than to harm a child. Oh my God. I didn't realize the martyr complex that's hidden inside there. Like, we would rather be drowned in the depths of the sea than harm a child, and we're going to name this law after that. It's like, get your damn Bible out of my life. Like, do we need to pull up the video of the lady at the news desk who like absolutely pops off? She's like, stop like trying to legislate my body with your religion. Like, I'm not a religious person, and better, like, more power to you. You don't need to get an abortion or whatever, then don't. But stop trying to make everybody else follow your stupid religion. Like, religious people are fine if they keep it to themselves. Like, it's like, I'm sure you're proud of your religion, much like many people are proud of their penises. But much like a penis, I don't really want you to whip it out in public, wave it around in my face. And especially, I don't want you to try to shove it down my throat, in public anyway. The reference was first made in April when conservative pastor Jackson Lamere, who earlier this year tried unsuccessfully to unseat Senator James Lankford, pledged during an interview with the far-right news network Real America's Voice to introduce his own, quote, Millstone Act that would cut off funding to, quote, any school district in America that teaches critical race theory or woke sexuality. Oh my God, the critical race theory. I keep forgetting that they truly want to pretend like there is no racism problem in this country. They just want to pretend like that was never a thing. With Bullard's proposal, Oklahoma joins nearly a dozen other states seeking to heavily restrict or ban access to gender-affirming healthcare for trans youth and adults in 2023. Another Oklahoma bill filed in December aims to bar physicians from providing, quote, gender transition procedures to patients younger than 21 years, punishable by a fine and up to a decade in prison. So they don't even, they have multiple laws. This is the weird thing is that it'll be several different laws. I guess they think, oh, if we can't get this one to pass, then we'll get a different one to pass. If the Millstone Act that they're talking about here doesn't pass, then they have a separate bill which will target younger than 21. Like, if the age 26 is too high for the for the representatives to vote for. Jesus Christ. So yeah, like they consistently are overreaching. I think, like, all available medical evidence and every major medical organization agrees that transition is the way to treat gender dysphoria. Watch and wait treatment is just an attempt at conversion therapy. You're just hoping that they grow out of it, but that's usually not what happens. That usually it just comes back up at some point later in their lives because it's persistent. And this is like a new way that I've thought of to explain this that I maybe would make things a little bit easier for people to understand. Like, trans people are functionally just allergic to our natural hormones in the same way that some people are allergic to their own sweat. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. It sounds weird because it is a little bit strange. Like, there are people who are allergic to their own sweat. It's like a skin reaction. It's not like they have anaphylactic, like they choke and can't breathe or whatever, but like they get a rash whenever they sweat. And trans people basically like have like a really negative biological reaction to being subject to these hormones. And like, we frequently notice a fairly immediate change when we start the correct hormones that ends up resolving a lot of these issues. People think like, oh, we need to address your depression first. Like, the depression is a result of the gender dysphoria. That's not the primary issue, right? And the other thing that I want to get out there before we wrap up the segment is like, those of you who think, oh, these kids need to be kids. They need to have fun. They need to focus on their schoolwork. They need to do these extracurricular activities and everything. Like, frequently, trans people who come out as adults, like, they did not do well in school, especially if they knew that they were trans at the time and like had a specific environment where they were being told to wait, because you're dealing with a situation where your body is constantly, like, you're just trapped in a situation where you're deeply like reacting badly. Like, you're distressed by it to some degree. It's not a fun, happy time. It keeps you from being able to have fun. It keeps you from being able to accomplish your schoolwork. Like, we don't perform well in school or work when we're denied social transition, basically. At the very minimum, social transition, if not medical transition. So it's not like good for the kids to make them wait. If you want them to wait, puberty blockers are an option. You can't stay on them forever because it will cause damage to your bones. But like, if you want them, like, put them on puberty blockers at age 12, and by the time they're 14, if they're still trans, then put them on hormones and let them grow up at the same pace as the rest of their peers. that is the reasonable thing to do. That is the medically understood, like, correct way to approach this. If you stick a gender dysphoric kid in therapy, the therapist is going to maybe work with them for a couple months and then be like, well, it kind of seems like, I can give you strategies to help you deal with your dysphoria, but you're always going to have the dysphoria until you get the medical care that you need. I am not a medical doctor. Like, they can, if needed, coordinate with a medical doctor and say, like, yeah, we've been doing therapy for a while and it's pretty clear to me that, yeah, the depression and other stuff is basically being caused by the gender dysphoria, which again, I can give you strategies to deal with it, but it's always going to be there. And I don't know why you want, like, is the outcome that these people want for, like, people to be aware that they have gender issues, but to constantly police and just manage their gender issues? Like, just, is the goal for these people that they just want us to manage our dysphoria by distracting ourselves and stuff? But like that's why you end up with a huge amount of substance abuse in the trans community also. Like, yeah, it's really difficult to engage with reality if you just don't want to be part of if you don't want to be in your body. So please let your kids transition. For the love of God, don't force them into a life of addiction and underemployment by preventing them from being able to assimilate in their target gender. Thank you. Good night. We were talking about Oklahoma earlier this week, I believe. So we'll do a follow-up segment on that. It's not a follow-up segment on that, actually. It's a whole new segment where we're just talking about a different law just that is also being proposed in Oklahoma because the Midwest is a terrible place to live. Alejandra Carballo on Twitter has, as usual, come in clutch by sharing some news from Oklahoma, which we have already talked about recently. I got no love for Oklahoma. I can't blame you if you live there, if you think that it's a trash hole. Let's see. Oklahoma has now introduced a bill that is effectively a de facto ban on all gender-affirming care in the state. If you recall, when we talked about this earlier this week, the law that they have proposed is a ban on gender-affirming care up to the age of 26. So this is a different bill, and it's banning all state and federal funding to any provider that performs gender-affirming care. So this is one of those ways in which they don't necessarily make it explicitly illegal to access the care. So it's like, if you're a trans person and you go and seek the care and you start cross-sex hormones, like, they can't make that illegal, right? They can't directly make that illegal. And they don't even necessarily have the power in all places to make it directly illegal for the doctor to prescribe you the medicine either. What they can do is they can sneak into these funding bills. If any hospital provides gender affirming care, so like if there are any doctors at a given hospital who provide, if you just have like an endocrinologist who prescribes hormones because that's like something that they can do for the purposes of transition, that hospital entirely could lose their state funding, like all of it, the entire hospital. So they're willing to put the care of an entire community on the line in order to stop trans care, and they're banking on the idea that obviously the hospital is invested in staying open, and they do sometimes need to stay open, or sometimes they do need state and federal funding in order to stay open, in order to provide certain levels of care for the community, right? And they will stop all gender affirming care. Like, this is one of those sneaky, like, indirect ways that they're going to make it effectively illegal, even though it is technically still legal. So like any hospital any individual clinic or provider who does this type of care is just going to not be able to do it if they want to keep that funding. So I guess if you work at a relatively small clinic, it could be okay. Let's see. Yes, and no provider shall be eligible for reimbursement through Medicaid or any other federal or state program or any other funding from any political subdivision of the state. So it means like the hospital would also not be able to accept Medicaid at all. It's not just direct. Yeah, it's not just direct state funding in the sense of like the hospital needs the state funding to stay open, but rather that like Medicaid will not do business with them. I'm now waiting on hospitals funded by the Satanic Temple. That would be great. And the other more insidious aspect of this is that state hospitals do, like, they work with Medicaid and they do have state funding. They apply for grants and stuff, I believe, from the like federal government and the state government, depending on the hospital. But Catholic hospitals don't. Catholic hospitals, I believe, are entirely private, and because it's like a religious institution, they don't receive that funding. So this could also have the ulterior side effect of closing public hospitals, so that then the only hospitals in the area are Catholic hospitals. And the other thing is, of course, a Catholic hospital is not going to be providing gender-affirming care in the first place. So they wouldn't lose any state funding even if they were getting it. Like, they might work with Medicaid in some cases. So if they do work with Medicaid, they will continue to be able to, because they weren't doing this in the first place. Just one of many sneaky, underhanded ways that they're making it functionally illegal for everyone, even adults, up to, beyond the age of 26, which is currently what they're trying to do. Yeah, like, and Alejandra points out that it does not matter if that money is being used directly for gender affirming care. Like, if the money is going toward the dermatology department or something, that money still gets cut off. Yeah, hospitals and clinics cannot operate without Medicaid funding, along with state and federal grants. There's not going to be able to be any surgery in the state. I don't actually know if there are very many transgender-related surgeons in the state. I suppose that could apply to if a hospital who just does hysterectomies does a gender-affirming hysterectomy, then they could lose their funding in general. This bill would mean that small LGBTQ community clinics that are currently receiving Ryan White HIV funding can no longer provide gender-affirming care. Doctors may refuse to see trans patients at all for fear that they will lose that funding. When the stakes are that high, they may just refuse the care. Like, yeah, the doctor might refuse you care at the public hospital, and then if the only other option is the Catholic hospital, let me be totally clear, the Catholic hospital will let you die. By the way, like, this is something that I need to have a conversation with all the people in my personal life about this. Like, don't ever take me to a Catholic hospital for any reason, especially if it's serious, because they will just let me die. Like, there's no way around that. Yeah, Alejandra closes out by saying, make no mistake, if this bill is enacted, trans people in Oklahoma will die as a result. It will be due to trans people resorting to the gray market for care, increased suicides from lack of treatment for gender dysphoria, being turned away from critical care at hospitals, etc. Right. We can't guarantee that that people will care for us in general. It's yet another case where there are duplicitous, underhanded ways of targeting us specifically. They don't have to make it strictly, literally illegal to be trans. They can't do that because that would be too obvious. The progressive, liberal, democratic side of the political spectrum would be like, whoa, you can't do that. That's not okay. So instead, they do it in this underhanded way, or they go outside of the normal process and use executive powers to do it. We're losing our democracy. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Happy New Year, and thank you to all of my viewers, and especially my patrons, and especially these ones: Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rovag, Jovian F. Gaudreau, Bean, Heather Clarkson, Amanda B., R. Halverson, Athiet, Sarah A., Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Suzanne Maynard, Nova, Mr. Atheist, and Elizabeth Bartell.